Okay, so today we're going to be talking about color theory. First off, I want to talk a little bit about the history, the science. This is an image of Isaac Newton. He was the first person to break down our understanding of color in sort of the modern way. So if you take a look at what he did, he was able to get a prism and split white light into its colors, into the colors essentially of the rainbow. Conversely, another way of thinking about this is if you were to add all of these colors together, you'll wind up with white. Goethe was another person that spent a lot of time thinking about the science and also about the philosophy of color. And he looked at creating color wheels that described emotions being corresponding with colors. This here is a standard color wheel, what you learn, in primary school, with primary colors, secondary colors, and a full wheel. There are a number of different systems for working with color, and depending on what you're doing, different systems are appropriate. So for printing, the system that is used is called CMYK. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, and yellow. So by adding cyan and magenta, you get blue. Magenta and yellow, you get red. Yellow and blue, you get green. And if you add them all together, you get black. And the way that it's used is to use a screen. It's called a screen, like silk screen, and you print in fine dots. And so the areas with darker color have larger dots. The areas with lighter color have smaller dots. So if you take a look up at a close-up of a magazine or a printed book or a poster, you'll see that it's made up of fine dots. And you've probably seen this before in black and white, in low-resolution magazines, in low-resolution newspapers. You can often see the dots, but in a high-quality catalog or a high-quality print, you might not see them unless you look very, very closely. Your eye essentially blends the colors together to make the image. Another system for looking at color is called RGB. RGB is red, green, and blue. And this is a system of adding together colors as light as opposed to colors as ink. So when you add red light with green light, you get yellow. When you add green light with blue light, you get cyan. And when you add blue light with red light, you get magenta. And if you add them all together, you get white. So this is called RGB. And it's essentially the same theory that we saw here. And it's also the same theory that you see, that you look at when you look at a projected image, or an image on a computer screen, or an image on your television set. It's the red, the green, and the blue light. And it's actually the same way that your eye works. Your eyes have receptors, and the receptors are for red, green, and blue, and then also just for the actual black and white presence of light. So here we have the color wheel with tints represented in a circle. And it gets broken down in a number of different ways, a number of different understandings and ways to use it, and a number of different attributes. So one of the main attributes we think of when we think of a color wheel, or when we think about looking at colors, are warm colors versus cool colors. And then you can break the color wheel down into different patterns and choose different palettes from that. So this is monochromatic, meaning it's the one color with various tints of that color. Analogous is when you have the color and then color beside it and the other one beside it, so you get this a very not uniform, but colors that are close to each other. Complementary are colors that are on the opposite sides of the wheel, and the complementary colors will pop a lot from each other because they are the furthest away from each other visually. And another way of choosing colors is to do a triadic selection, and this will give you a more unusual color combination. So when you look at color, you really need to think about how the colors are affecting each other. So if you look at this image here, you'll see the gray on a green ground and the gray on a dark purple ground. And somehow it seems that this gray is darker than this gray. But they're actually the same gray. It's the effect of the lighter, brighter color versus the darker color, the effect that it is having on the color next to it. So we can see this again here and here. And there's another example here. So it's important to think about how the colors are interacting and how they are working together. Okay, so in terms of using color for art purposes or design purposes, we think about palettes and combinations. So there are a number of systems for that, and this is actually somebody created a book of every known color and painted them. So this is a very early system. But the system that we use now often is called Pantone, and Pantone is basically a proprietary system of colors. You see a little registered trademark there, and this is for making sure that you have consistent colors, if you have branded colors, if you need very pure colors. One thing to talk about when you're looking at something like a CMYK, the colors might change depending on the material you're printing on. It may change depending on the different printers. So the one way to get a very standardized, reliable color is to use the Pantone system. And you pull them out like little chips, much like you do when you go to the hardware store and choose paint colors. So someone did a nice project where they found actual natural objects and then selected the matching Pantone color. And Pantone colors come in a very big swatch book, as you can see, with all the colors, and it looks again very much like the colors you see when you go to the hardware store. This is the interface for Photoshop. You guys have already seen this, but just we'll break it down a little bit for you now. We've been working with this area here where you can pick the different tints, and then you can change the hues here. But we'll see here, this is the RGB numeric system, a CMYK numeric system, and then this here is called the hex number, and that's the number that you use when you're creating a website. It's the number you use for coding. And you can see how you can take colors from the actual world and sample them and translate them into the different applications. So the next thing to think about is what colors do you want to use and how do you want to use them, what things you want to take for inspiration, and what kinds of things do you want to make. So there are many ways to do this. One is to collect things and be able to pay attention to what colors seem nice together, that work well together, and then to break that down into constituent colors. So here we have a photograph of a blue lookout, sorry, a yellow lookout on a blue ground, and a color palette to match. An ocean scene and the colors of the ocean scene. A tabletop scene with lemons and herbs and what that looks like in colors. Another ocean scene. One thing to think about when you're choosing colors, or one way to get inspiration, is to look at nature. Nature has its own way of combining things in very beautiful ways, and it's a great place to take inspiration from. So this is the rubber plant, and you can see it has these lovely green hues, and then underneath a red color. And this is a similar plant. And we see an image here of a forest with the elephant and the grey sky, and you can see how this forms a lovely set of colors. Another way to think about it is or another way to take inspiration is to look around you and see what colors are standing out or visually striking or catching your eye, and to think about taking a little snapshot or a frame from an experience. These images are by a photographer called Sol Leiter, and he was just very good and had great sensitivity to color. Another way to think about color is how it can be used conceptually to be striking and unexpected, and then also to evoke associations. So this person created a project where they used infrared camera film, and they went to Africa to different war zones or different combat zones, and they took photographs of the soldiers there. And the infrared, it rendered anything that's green in these beautiful red and purple tones. And it's striking, obviously, because we see these camouflage in color combinations you wouldn't expect. And then we also see this striking red, which, given he's holding this rocket thrower, there's a leap that your mind makes to blood very quickly. This is another combination taken from the world. And then you can see how you can use colors as ways to form designs. So this is a collection of old chairs with the photo taken, and then a similar palette in a fashion construction. And then we can just see different examples of softer colors, brighter colors in unexpected places in architecture, in windows. And this is another thing to think about too. If you have many objects, the objects can be difficult to look at, they can be busy. But if they're organized together neatly by color, it can be quite lovely to look at and interesting to look at. And here's another set of items in a collection of the same color or similar color. And then when you're making things, this is an example of what the result of a color palette choice. And this is a identity someone's created. We can see a letterhead, we can see envelope, we can see their business card, we can see here would be their another kind of envelope. And so you see the pastel-y pinks against the gray, against a dark gray, and then there's a blue-gray here. And this is a brighter and more kind of rainbowy set of colors together. And then this is a combination of papers. The colors as described are not the only colors available to use. This image is of a book cover that was printed with metallic ink. And in terms of CMYK, you can't really get anything really close to the metallic look. And in an image, such as you're looking at now, it's an approximation with the texture. But you can print metallic colors, as special Pantone colors. And here we see someone's created an identity where they've printed on gray and cream paper with this nice gold. This would be gold foil. Okay, let's talk about color correction. So this image of ducks is an image where the color balance is really off. You don't see this so often anymore because there are so many things to automatically correct for it. But in the film world, we used to see this a lot, where an image might have a very, very, very emphasized cast over the top. So you can see this image has a magenta cast over the top, but it actually can be corrected. So you wind up with a better balance. This is an image of a girl looking out on a balcony, and this image has a soft look, a slightly washed out look. If you look at the blacks, they're actually not totally black. If you look at the lights, they're actually a little bit gray. And that's part of the style of it. If you wanted to take this and make it more perhaps contemporary and perhaps a little bit closer to what your eye would see, you can adjust it by increasing the contrast and adjusting the color balance so that you wind up with something more natural, more realistic. It's important to note that it's not necessarily a judgment on either style. What's important is to remember that you, as an artist working in Photoshop, are able to control this and actively think about how you want to create the image. This is another image where we have a little bit of a yellow cast on the top. We know that this is not the natural color because it's very much a high daylight color, a very high daylight image. We can see with the bright light against her, it's probably shot in the middle of the day, and middle of the day daylight is very blue. So this image should actually be more blue if it were to be more natural. And so this image is now adjusted to blue, to be more blue by removing some of the yellow. And when we do that, we see that we've gained contrast at the same time. The image seems clearer and punchier. But this image, former image, might be evocative of photographs from the 1970s. If you've seen old photos from that era, old color photos, often they have a yellow cast and they can have like a certain kind of nostalgia to them. Which is to say that, again, that there may be a reason for working with this kind of color and not having it be the more natural color. Here we can see that an image is shot in daylight, and the daylight and the shadow is very blue, and it's not very appealing. So you can take the color and warm it up a little bit and increase the contrast to get something a little bit more appealing, a little bit more flattering to the model here. And that's something that's thought about in cinema all the time now. So images are often shot to be fairly plain in a lot of ways, and then they come in and post and add in elements such as sky, and then they'll adjust the color, and they'll also adjust the contrast, so we can see his face is much clearer, and the contrast in his face is much higher here, and we see more detail in the contrast in the jacket, and we see the colors have shifted a little bit to create this mood. This is from Star Wars. You can see this is the original shot before they did any adjustment, and we can see that her outfit's kind of beige. All of their uniforms are quite gray, and what they've done here is they've changed the image to be more orange and more blue. And if you go back to remembering our complementary colors, the colors that are opposite on the wheel, so the orange and the blue are opposite, they stand out from each other. Color can also be used to create a mood, an effect to make you feel something. So we see our girl here. This is from the girl with the dragon tattoo, and this is obviously very natural looking. We see this very highly stylized image here, and we could think about, well, why change the image from this to this? And we could think about what the mood of this is. We could say perhaps she looks like she's in a classroom. Perhaps she looks like she's sitting by a window. Perhaps she seems quite natural. Whereas we can look at this and we can think that perhaps she is very dark. There's a strangeness to it in its green. There's something a little bit almost zombie-ish in the color. So it's taken the image and turned it into something that feels almost like a horror genre. So that's the complementary color combination. And once you've seen it, the yellow and the yellow and blue, or the orange and blue, you see it all the time. It's very much a trope in action films right now. They're nearly always this orange and or yellow and blue color combination, and we can see it here too. This would just be gray, and here too, much of this in the background would be more gray, but they've been made to be quite blue here, and his face is standing out as it's orange. You can see our characters here. But that's not the only way to do it. We can use complementary colors, other sets of complementary colors. So this is a film called Amelie, which you may have seen. And the color combination they used in the film was red and green to give the film a very specific and unique look. And we can see the art direction of her bedroom here, with the red walls and the green fabric and the green character on her nightstand. And you can also look at using color combinations that are analogous. This film is Fight Club, and they use this palette that goes from yellow to green, and that creates the yellows create somewhat of like a unnatural pop look, and the green is slightly sickly and strange. And we see it here again. You see this sort of pop look of the bright yellow, and then the slightly strange and sickly kind of color of these greens and blue greens. This is Skyfall, and we can see here they've gone also more from like yellows and browns to blue greens. Monochromatic colors. You can see this film was called American Hustle, and they had a very monochromatic color scheme here, very much in the yellows and browns that I was talking about, actually, with the idea of looking back at the photographs from the 1970s. And triadic color combinations really stand out as being very different from anything else. So when you see it, it will have a very specific and a very unique look. So this is a film by Godard, and we see the red and the blue, and it's quite striking. And then this is a film called Burn After Reading, and they did the color combination. The whole film was in this color combination, and so it had its own specific look to it. And the example that I'm going to show you is of this guy here. So if we take a look at this, it looks like any good old shopping mall basement. It's very gray with a little bit of orange light. His face is a little bit yellow, but overall the color there's not that much color. For a color photo, we see some bright yellow here, just a little bit of a color face, but the image is essentially very gray. So to generate more interest, we've taken the same technique of the action films and made the image more blue, and then made his face more orange, and decreased decreased some of the tone in the back to make it a little bit darker. So if we go back, you'll see that. And then we also took out the yellow that was in the lights here, and we made this area actually deliberately black and white so that the yellow wouldn't distract from his face. So I'll show you that shortly.